Let's check it's all working. Yeah. Let's welcome Ben Hislop, everyone. Thank you.
Great, and I've just come off a nice introduction for everyone. I really appreciate you guys all coming here to listen to me talk about some of my research ideas and where I've come from. So I'm going to start with a story I just was told by a ex-hairdresser and who basically talked about learning social science just from doing it. And that's actually a real frustration of mine when I was younger, and I was asking people who were like really good socially, like, so what is it you do that makes everyone like you? Because that wasn't my experience. And they couldn't really explain it, right? It's just intuitive, it was instinctive, it was just something that they'd grown up with and developed. And whether they didn't want to tell me or not, I'm going to assume that they just weren't able to verbalise it. So what research does is it tries to make things explicit that are otherwise implicit, so hidden, right? So you're trying to bring it out into the open so that everyone can learn from it directly. And so that's been my journey, basically trying to use the knowledge base that's out there and all these ideas and, the wonders of the internet to search ideas and, let them all mixed together in your head to try and do what Andrew does, which is to make sense of complexity. And that really resonated with me because it's sort of, we have been corresponding for some years now, and that's where we sort of have a very similar approach to things where we try and identify something that's a bit messy and sort of a lot of things, a lot of moving parts that aren't quite, meshing together. We can, we both have that, I think, ability to, find the inherent, the truth behind the kind of the noise, so to speak. So that's been my approach, and I can take you through my journey a bit now. So I'm now 47, and I began researching this when I was sort of 22, maybe. So is that right? Yeah. I mean, I went from engineering into how universities innovate and how they can make academics talk to business people. And that then was my first sort of master's, a 10-year master's, would you believe? And then that became a second then PhD program, which was another 10-year process in between a little bit of working and stuff. But what I developed in the first, looking at innovation and how people who are different to each other can sort of come together and work together, I actually went over to the UK and interviewed a whole bunch of people in the technology transfer realm. And what they are is they're people whose job it is, sort of like the facilitator that Peter is. They try to bring together the business people, the students, the academics, and make them all mix together and transfer the knowledge from the university to the business and even back again. And that works really well when it's humming. It's a real job creator and wealth creator. And there's places like Oxford in the UK and Cambridge that do it really well. So I did a bunch of interviews and turned those conversations into a model, which is in engineering terms basically variables that all affect each other. And then I initially it was very complex, and when I came back to Australia, I was like sort of realising, as Andrew does as well, trying to reduce it down to its bare minimum. And it came down to 5 variables, okay, or 5 components that all talk to each other pretty much. And that was the first master's. And the second, the PhD, I then tried to match that with psychology, the different theories. So I ended up in one of the papers I published identifying over 50 psychology theories and working them into either the components of the model or the interactions. So if you can imagine, like, how you have like join the dots. Well, imagine like 5 dots on a piece of paper, and there's a line between every single dot, and actually 2 lines, because they can go either way, right? They're called the impacts, and they're directional. So that's a very complex model, as you can imagine. So ended up what's called iterating or moving that model through various permutations. And I actually was using myself as a guinea pig over the years and trying to improve it. So I've got to the point now where I am employed by Defence, and part of my role is in helping them to restructure a Defence Science and Technology group. They were surprised that I was doing that for them, but it turned out that I kind of got the gig because they thought I was going to not cause too many waves, and I'm basically a wave machine. So as it turns out, yeah, and I'm now I actually just got a role where I'm formally creating a pilot at in my division to create a collaboration system because my organisation it's designed to do research, but it's hierarchical, and that militates, or that is a force against innovation. When you have people to report to, everyone's sort of trying to make their boss look good or trying to reduce risk, and so there really isn't a great incentive to either create a new idea or to collaborate across parts of the division, because you got your boss that might not like you talking to someone else, or what's their incentive to talk to you. So it's a whole lack of incentives in a hierarchical system to innovate, and without going into sort of technicalities, that's generally why most government departments end up becoming relatively toxic environments. Yeah, so people here have seen that happening. Yeah, so it comes back to also because I mentioned the 5-component model, which is highly complex. Well, in research circles, that's very hard to prove, right? It's almost like it's hard to prove as what chakras are, or as any new age thing would be to sort of prove, because everything is so qualitative and it disappears in your hand. Well, that's the kind of thing we're trying to put numbers against something that complicated. The statistical techniques that they have just don't really function at that level of complexity. So everyone is forced to reduce the complexity of their models to like only a few effects and a few components. And anyway, so I've actually coincidentally worked out a way to validate it, and that's currently with a journal. So that's another subject, but entirely. But anyway, I'm really excited about the actual model itself, and there's two parts to it. One is a collaborative model, and one is also a hierarchical version of the same model. And the theory is that, as I was talking to Peter about in the cafe, that there's 5 basically. So you saw behind you the slider. So imagine 5 of these sliders, right? So just that for me, will you? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, thank you. And so 5 of those, and I'll take you. Just do 5 lines for me, yeah. And I'll take you through what they each are.
So just look at chakras.
Yeah, maybe. I don't study much New Age stuff, but I have a lot of respect for people who can have that intuitive feel for how people respond, and it's almost like they're working at the level of theory, but it's all unconscious, and they're basically, it's almost like their ideas or their theory is like it's like a lens through which they just communicate with people. And but I can't comment any further than that, and I wouldn't pretend to, but I just speak to the work that I've done. So yeah, exactly. So there's so I'm going to just go through them one at a time. So the first one is I'm going to say it's like the benefit. So one is on the left hand side hierarchy, it's self-interest. So it's the benefit to yourself, and on the other side you can move along to collective interest. So it's like the benefit of the group. Okay. None of this is like this brain surgery, rocket science. It's all about bringing together. Okay, is the tricky thing. So people who have, so this is about, just going back a bit again, this is about a psychological perspective or mindset people have. So if you're more hierarchical, and it doesn't mean you're evil or psychopathic or anything, although there may be some correspondence there, but I'm not going to sort of claim that, because I've actually just written a book chapter that's going to be published very shortly about how it's actually important for people who are hierarchical style leaders to appreciate how the value they can bring to the group, and i.e. that's not the only way they can do things, but how that's helpful. Like, for example, being able to be a game player with the hierarchy, so you actually look after your people by making sure you can play the game and guard against your own people being hurt. So that's just a quick example. But going back to the model, so these are the components, they're not the interactions. The interactions are another level of complexity, which I won't go into. But okay, the next one is going to be on the left is going to be status. Yep, and it's going to be on the right, liking, Liking. So this is basically where you either pursue a formal acknowledgement of like how important you are, or you try and pursue people, you try and get people to like you, right? So do they just, is it like a familiar kind of appreciation, or is it like a formal recognition of how important you are in the team or the organisation? Okay, so, and all these things are good to pursue, like both sides, right? If you can get both, that's great. It's not like, but it's more a preference. Which one do you actually go for? So some people will, for example, betray a friend to try and get the promotion, and some people will, sacrifice a promotion because they want to maintain a friendship, stuff like that. So the next one is going to be direct reciprocity on the left, and on the right there's indirect reciprocity. And you guys are going to really recognise this one, because have you heard of pay it forward? Yeah, yep. So indirect reciprocity is a formal term for it, and this comes from evolutionary psychology actually. I've drawn from social psychology, organizational psychology, evolutionary psychology, and positive psychology. So yeah. Okay, so direct reciprocity is where if you do something for me, then I will do it for you. So that means you only want to actually work with people who can offer you something back in return, right? So if you're like rich and there's a poor person, or like a waiter, they can't really help you, so you basically are happy to treat them with disdain, because they can't really hurt you or whatever. So indirect reciprocity is where you will help others endlessly, right? You keep on putting out, and it's pay it forward. And how that helps in evolutionary terms, so all these strategies actually are good for the individual, right? They're not just good for everyone else, because it's about, for example, collective interest. If you're in a tribe and you help the tribe, then that's obviously going to strengthen the tribe, and then the resources are there for you to then draw down upon. Indirect reciprocity is all about building reputation. Okay, so if others see you helping others, or you personally have built up like a bank of favours kind of thing, then that's going to be good for you in the long term. Okay, so it is still self-interested, but it's a different strategy, right? So these are all evolutionarily useful strategies, but they're, if I can say, another paper I published talks about how chimpanzees were originally very hierarchical, and then because of the fact that we came down from the trees and we were hunter-gatherers, and there's a lot more risk around, there's a lot more line of sight, so reputational effects are more important. That meant that as hominins, we started developing these collaborative abilities a lot more strongly, and you can see those in the chimpanzee cousins, which are called. Anyone tell me who the chimpanzee cousins are called? Okay, they're famous for having lots of sex.
The bonobos, is it?
Bonobos, exactly. I was actually going blank there. Yeah, so bonobos actually are a case study of they're like a microcosm of a collaborative kind of offshoot that happened relatively quickly, but that was in a certain circumstance, which I do cover. But moving on, so we're going to go down to on the left is going to be certainty, and on the right is going to be agency. Okay, so now people who are old dog new tricks they don't like the change, right? They're stuck in their ways. That's certainty, right? People who really like things to be the same breakfast, whatever. Like any change is disruptive. It's unpleasant. An agency is about people who can, as I define it very specifically, it's people who can speak, who would suggest change. So if you're out in the on the savannah, then you're going to be able to say, why don't we go over here, not over there? Why don't we try this fruit? It's a bit different, right? Why don't we? So whereas certainly these people who really try and resist change, and they'll actually speak up for the status quo. And again, both things can be good or bad depending on the situation and someone's preference. And these can be mixed up as well, but I think generally they're grouped left to right. So, and I'm going to go to the final one, which is on the left. It's going to be, what do I call it? I call one other respect and one, so it's basically about whether you focus on other people's competence or you focus upon what people think of your competence, okay? So I'm going to call it, on the right it's other respect, and on and on the left is own respect. That's right. This is coming back from a couple of years of publishing ago. It's own respect. Okay, so you might notice some people, like, they're alert to other people's competence. They're like, okay, you're actually really good at that. Whereas some people are like more about, they really want to be praised and be given lots of credit for whatever they're good at, right? And they're sort of blind to other people and what their competencies are. And I see this actually reflected in my workplace really interestingly. I'm going to go into the quick story now because this is all getting very dry. I'll go to questions very shortly, actually. But so I've noticed in my work unit that the culture tends to switch from one to the other. So it'll be a more collaborative culture, and the leader takes a big role here. They actually provide the model for people to work upon, and provide the guidance, because their own behaviour, are they collaborative, are they hierarchical, provides sets sort of the way of people behaving. And that then filters down, people adopt it. So, and it's really clear in my workplace that even like work units that are in the same section, they'll have completely different cultures, depending upon generally who the leader is. So, I'm going to pause there for questions, because I think you guys are pretty exhausted with all that stuff. That's not too bad.
Good.
Okay. Okay, so yeah.
So if you were advising the Omni Dreaming group, where we've got our kind of two components, where the individual Omni healers are wanting to build their own community, and therefore their natural either hierarchy to collaborative spectrum will be different to others in the group. And then if you look at the bigger Omni Dreaming group community, allowing access for these healers to connect with a hopefully growing community of people that want to come to events, what kind of advice do you give with that? It's not a tension, but with that kind of to and froing of the individual separate models of where they fall, and then the overall Omni Dreaming, which I'm hoping is more the egalitarian collaborative style.
Yeah, so it's always going to be an issue because people have their preferences, and there's examples, for example, of organisations that have suddenly become egalitarian, and there's actually a tomato canning company there's been a really interesting case study where they got rid of all the executive positions and they devolved themselves just to teams, and everyone basically is almost like you guys are. You're sort of showing your wares to the group, and people form contracts with each other in each other's. So people are members of various teams, and they then help other teams depending upon if they can offer some expertise. And it's all very organic. It's almost like the pure hunter-gatherer kind of model, right? And there's absolutely very little executive kind of top-down direction. And it works wonderfully well, and they're very profitable, and everyone loves it. But the transition from hierarchical to that model, about 30% of people find it very challenging, and they end up just leaving because they can't make that psychological shift. So, and I actually call it a chimpanzee mindset, basically, which is, it's insulting, but I don't mean it that way. I mean in terms of, it's just like they're stuck in a way of operating which modern society really encourages. Modern society is it's generally hierarchical. Places like this are quite rare, and I'm hoping that it'll become more common. People realise that it's so important to have exposure to situations like this, so you can. It's almost like activating that part of your brain. It's like a whole different way of operating, because each of these columns, left and right, they're rewarding, right? You get a reward, like a dopamine, whatever. It just feels good to be respected. It feels good for things to be certain, but people can get stuck on that side. And so, if you're offering something which is different to their experience, then you have to give them time. And I would say that, I haven't proven this yet because I haven't actually exposed these ideas in any kind of lab environment or any kind of research situation. But I would love to actually in the military give officers training and stuff and see how they respond. But yeah, certainly I would personally like to see people, at least the leaders, be aware of it, so they can embody the ideas and be sensitive to the fact that members may not respond to it. They may initially give people some more certainty. For example, they may give them some more direct reciprocity, they may give them some more respect. That's what they want. But hopefully they're seeing the other group members work, and they can it sort of might switch them on. And it sort of reminds me of, have you heard of like a keto diet, and ketosis and stuff like that? So there's two energy pathways. There's the glucose pathway, and then there's the fats pathway. And it's the same thing. Like, I actually spoke to a biological researcher, a friend of mine yesterday, he was really excited about trying ketosis, even though he should know about it, but he was talking about cellular pathways sort of going into latency, they've never been activated. Well, it's the same principle here. Psychological pathways haven't been activated. So it's about giving people time and not saying that they're like a bad person for, being as they are, wanting status and being selfish and that kind of stuff. See it as like they've got to learn that there's a different way of operating, and maybe, embody that for them and distribute it, demonstrate it to them, and give them time. And I would love there to be some sort of learning around this stuff, like a course, right? I'll have to do. I'll be wanting to do some online stuff actually, and I never actually got around to getting much past a couple of disorganised stuff. So that would be actually a really great opportunity to talk to you further actually. So yeah, but does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I've spent most of my life possibly being just self-employed, running my own thing, and so I've never had to really work with people collaboratively in the sense that I've just done music, organised the band, which has to be a bit hierarchical, do music, turn up, do your thing, go. It's but my natural default is more collaborative. So as we've now entered into this Omni Dreaming phase where I'm really enjoying holding space, the Omni Healers soon work out that I'm very collaborative and possibly not offering as much hierarchical kind of direction as could be given, which can lead to frustration. But and I've noticed some people are fine with it, other people we have to kind of work through it. How can I learn to, perhaps be a little bit more on this hierarchical side of the spectrum while maintaining the general thrust of being, my goal is collaboration and definitely more the egalitarian focus?
So yeah, I would say it's a constant journey, like for myself, for certainly. Like I'm constantly reminding myself. Like for example, there's a certain okay, this is a bit of a personal story, but there's a certain person I'm very keen on, and still am, but I was like too keen, right? And she was basically saying, Salami fella. And I realised that I actually had a hierarchical mindset, right? I was seeing her as I was my own interest. It was all about me, possessing her and bringing her into my life, and she's trying to say, look, it's just, don't try and hold me. This is not going to work, right? I'm a free spirit. And I just went bang. One day I went, actually, why don't I follow my own advice here and see it as like, it's a collaboration, right? Like, what's in her interest? And within hours, that compulsive, possessive, like behaviour just disappeared. Like I have texts to show you that I could, yeah. And she was like, "Oh, great, finally." So for me, to answer your question, I think that the research, I would guide you towards the research, and I'm happy to supply it. I wish it was in better, more easy digestible form. I'd like to write a book on it, but I could certainly highlight sections of papers.
And I can add the link to, we're videoing today, so I can add the link to that.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess my learning needs to be a little bit reverse of yours, where I've been a little bit more overly laissez-faire, needing to be a little bit more. Whereas I imagine a lot of people go the other way, and that's the norm, is to go from a more hierarchical to allow yourself to be more collaborative.
I think so.
So would you be able to point me into directions of research that go the other way around? Is that just learning managerial skills, or?
So, I mean, there's probably plenty of resources out there that are a lot more, explicit on managing groups and professional behaviours, which I haven't integrated or attempted to integrate into my research ideas. But I actually would elaborate to say that I'm generally very collaborative, and there was only that one person.
Right.
And it was weird because I was like, why am I being this way? But generally speaking, I'm the same.
Right.
And it's actually, I've been trying to learn how to be more hierarchical in my workplace, which includes showing people a lot more, or being a lot more aware of the fact that they want to see you respecting them. Like people who are like, sort of quite egotistical and bossy. They really want to see, you're so amazing, and they eat it up. And so, learning that stuff is really useful.
Can I just add there from my perspective?
Can we hear this on the recording, your comments over there?
It's got the two mics.
Okay.
From multidisciplinary areas, for you to do what you need to do, you need to step into this hierarchical and create a boundary, a basis of what is
structural, almost,
and then it falls into the other.
Yeah, okay.
So people know that this is the base level. If you fall beyond it, then that's not acceptable. But do anything above it. Go. But this is the basis for this.
What you're saying is it's egalitarian in the camp, but it's hierarchical at the gate.
Exactly. So there you go. I wouldn't have said it like that. I would have said it the way I did. Right.
And you're also preempting my talk about primary cells and disowned cells.
Yes.
So
Well, I'll definitely be listening to that.
The idea is that when you understand how you operate out of these primary cells, you've actually disowned a lot of other cells, and it's an opportunity to own that self. You don't have to become it, but you incorporate it in and able to blend it. You use both. So when you understand.
And what I'm enjoying about the collaboration of the different Omni healers is that I'm not having to bring people into a fold or a flock or membership. I'm allowing people to be their own person, their own leaders, and just trying to maintain the space for them to carry out what they do. So I don't have to be as hierarchical, which is good, and I think it's kind of working in many ways. But I'm learning, and I'm learning from you guys, which is great, and it's kind of organically coming into play. But I'm keen to learn how to step into some of these roles, just to make it easier, not to control people, but just to make it easier for them to carry out what they do.
When I look at that, there's a number of things come to my mind, but thank you for your story, because the first thing came to me was that plays out in every area of our life, plays out in our relationships. It's not just groups working together. But then the other thing, is it really like many other things in the New Age or spiritual community? It's about being in the middle. It's about weaving from one to the other as circumstances
that's actually like the point I was. Okay.
No, you'll need it back on you.
Okay. That's actually the point I was really wanting to address from what Peter was saying to jump to that. So there's in the military there's a real thing at the moment, and Australia's got a bit of is leading the way, and the Americans and the British and the Canadians are actually watching us do this, and it's called Agile Command and Control, and they're experimenting with headquarters, how to design headquarters so that, because the idea is that in some situations you want to be able to have a strict command and control, like do this, do that, and in other situations you want the subordinates to be able to take their own lead, right? So and I would extend that generally to life, right? That people, ideally you want to have command of both sides, so that you want to have expertise in both areas, so that you can quickly shift depending upon who you're working with and the circumstances in which you're working. So as Peter was saying, sometimes he has to lay down the law or direct people in his band to say be here on time, and then switch to when he's making the music. He becomes collaborative, and it's all about hearing different ideas, lots of agency, lots of respecting each other's abilities. So you constantly and it can be second by second, So for me, this is a really useful way of understanding a lot of complexities of people who are stuck in one side or the other. You can see them; they can get really frozen in situations that don't fit their psychology, and they get angry, or can get angry, or they can withdraw, they can disengage. Because that's the other element too, is that this is all about what I call engagement, where it comes back to the hunter-gatherers, where again, some published work of mine, where if you can imagine a tribe, so a collective of people, imagine there's 30 people, and then imagine there was like 3 subgroups of 10 each. Well, if in this subgroup it's more hierarchical, and this one's more egalitarian, well, this one might lose people to this one over here, right? So you have the power of the feet, right? So you have this way of, and as I part of this sort of idea is that this really turbocharged the advantages and the ability of us to collaborate, because it meant that a subgroup that could demonstrate to the entire tribe how well it's treating each other in this sort of collaborative way would have an advantage. Because generally speaking, hierarchical is all about alpha male, the big guy, big man leader, right? The sort of Trump character who everyone wants to go to because he has certainty, he has strength, he's a big guy, he speaks powerfully, but in a small tribe, that is only useful to a certain extent, right? If there's a fight, you want the guy to break up the fight. If there's like a invading animal, you want them to direct the defenses, right? But generally speaking, maybe you want to have everyone relaxing, and and especially don't want that alpha male monopolising females, right? Which is generally how primates work. It's like, and it's quite rare to have what they call pair bonding, or certainly empowering of females, right? To actually be able to say, look, I'm not being treated well in this group, I might go over here, and that's actually, I think, one of the important cause by the ability of females to not want to be mistreated and to direct and to seek equal treatment back in the hominin days, and there's evidence from Erectus where basically there was a very fast change in body differences in size. So females used to be quite small relative to males, and they eventually became nearly similar, and the canines reduced in size, and that happened really, really quickly. And this is all about female empowerment and the taming of males, basically, who are overly aggressive. But I believe that modern society, people like that can become, we see it every day, right, in the way that men can treat women. So, and also myself in my own story. So I think that tendency is still there, but back in the tribal days, hunter-gatherer days, I'm postulating that, a woman could just go to a different subgroup. There was no marriage, there was no and they could take the children with them just over there, right, to the other camp, bang, done. You know, and there's no going to sign a contract or, you know, going through legal aid. It's just, and you're safe over there, right? They'll look after you, those people. So that was I think an important mechanism. So, but to answer your question, yeah, I think it's important to be able to have awareness of the strengths of both sets of behaviours, and be able to adapt to the situation.
I have a question.
Yes.
How much within the field, or maybe two sides to it, how much within the Defence Force that you're working with at the moment, and then other previous work, where there's been an assessment of the values, either of the people that are, say, employees coming into it, like some people, like a requirement I imagine to get into the army would be that you have to be physically fit, etc., and meet certain criteria. Then my point is that if there's a values profiling, a values assessment
Yep.
of the employees, for lack of a better word,
Yep.
and if that's matched with the leadership style, so if you've got authoritarian, if you've got collaborative, you've got a laissez-faire leadership,
Yep.
it shows up in the values. Are they doing that kind of work as part of it? It marries very well with this model that you've got at the moment, and if it doesn't have values in it, I find that would be a big gap, but you may not have addressed that today.
No, I actually can speak to that. It's a good point, and it's one of the points I make in that book chapter I mentioned recently, which hopefully will come out soon. I can give you guys a copy actually now. It's I have obviously the chapter written. So the idea being that, and I've seen this myself, right? You give some sort of leader, you know, a manager, a bunch of training, you know, in being a nicer person and not being such a, you know, a-hole, and then they keep being an a-hole, right? And you might say, well, you know, didn't you absorb the values? Didn't you absorb the lesson, right? But you've got to, well, to me, the interpretation that I give, it's almost like they see themselves as being a lion, and you're teaching them about how all the sheep operate, right? And to them, because it doesn't resonate, it doesn't reward them, you know, they're stuck in this side, then they see this stuff as almost like it's like a sucker's game, you know. Okay, but not. What's even worse is to then say, right, well, if I use the language, if I talk about culture, if I talk about, you know, below the line behaviours, above the line behaviours, I talk about, you know, not gossiping or not whatever. I think gossiping is okay, by the way, done in certain ways. Peter and I discussed this before. But they learn to parrot the words and they don't exhibit the behaviours because they haven't got the psychological rewards that are coming in.
That's right. So that's why I come back to values being an innate criteria for anything that you do in life, anything that you be, whether it's hierarchical or egalitarian, that core set of values, which is going to shape your worldview, which could be a military framework versus a different one, and that those values are going to change depending on your priority, your focus, and also your foundation, and they fall into groups. So if there's a misalignment with a company or an institutional model, which I've personally been, I'm not in alignment with those values. If it's okay for the gold plaque on the door and you don't walk your talk, as we say, then that's not a values alignment. And if you're out of alignment with your values, you're not, inverted commas in our lingo, living your truth, you're not living by integrity, therefore all of that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely would agree that, and so I actually wrote a paper about the culture in the military, and it comes down in that agile C2 stuff, where people experience it as culture, and they experience, and they might also see it as the values expressed officially in like documentation, etc. Right? So, but what's written down on a piece of paper, or you know, told to people in emails, or you know, the CEO might
Can be very, very different. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I definitely hear what you're saying in terms of you know, you may have a mismatch between your own approach and the way that the culture works, and that's what I was mentioning before about how the work units that I've experienced have different, as I call them, they work from different sides of the spectrum, but I think that because like back to evolutionary psychology, because to me everything has to be, it's an evolved thing. We've only lived in cities for 10,000 years, and we've been evolving for 6 million years since we separated from chimpanzees, and that's a lot longer. Okay, so, and back in the hunter-gatherer days, people didn't have anything written down. You know, it was all basically how you interacted with someone, your tone of voice, you're right, you had the way you held your body. That was your values, right? So the way, if you want to put a layer on top of that, then to me it's like a legal contract, and laws and whatever only hold water if someone can enforce them, right? And there's plenty of people around who are wealthy enough and powerful enough to ignore whatever the law says. And, you know, like Putin or whatever would just go, yeah, I'll have another term, thanks. You know, it doesn't matter what the Constitution says, because so end of the day, I only really trust things that come from our ancient psychological evolutionary background. But I think that would be a good conversation to have, to say, you know, how do values and culture kind of translate to, you know, to some of these things that I'm talking about, and you probably would find there would be a lot of correspondence.
There is, yeah.
Yep.
I just ask, do you, when you get groups together, because I imagine you have think tanks or people coming.
This is my first one.
People coming together in the workplace. I mean, many years ago, lots of companies did Myers-Briggs, and then they understood how introverts work and how extroverts work, and they made put them together in groups, because the introverts would be deep thinkers, ponderers, extroverts, I'm one, who think out loud, which can be very irritating to a introvert. But it made for a good group of like brainstorming and ideas and then getting to an end result. So do these on either side, self-interest, collective interest, do they come together?
Do they correspond to that other spectrum?
Yeah.
It's actually a great question, and I've come to a bit of a realization, because I originally thought that introversion was caused by people not learning to express themselves, or feeling not confident, or maybe having some trauma in their background. And I've realised since then that actually that's not really the way it is. That there is actually a real spectrum of people. And the short answer is I don't know, but I suspect, and I need to do the research. This is something I haven't explored really at all, but certainly where I work, there's a lot of introverts, and they got really annoyed with me telling them that their introversion was not valid. So that wasn't good. But sometimes you can say the wrong thing, and yeah, I don't always get it right at all. But yeah, I would think that there would be some correspondence, because I think that the left-hand side would more support extroversion in various ways. It would actually be a fascinating thing to look at, and certainly the introverts that I know and work with and friends with, they are very much on the collaborative side. Generally speaking, like they will work hard for the company. They'll they really can, and they can be used and abused. People like that, you know, they can be seen to be someone who will just do the work and shut up, and you know, and others will take advantage of them, and often the ones who do can be more extroverted. But that's only a working theory. I can't.
Well, it's basically where you get your energy from. There's no right or wrong about how you are. It's not good or bad to be either. It's just where you get your energy from. And an introvert needs quiet space, needs calm, whereas an extrovert likes to be in groups, and energy is raised.
Yeah.
Among other things.
Yeah, and I'm really not sure about, but I mean, that's what I observed as well, but I can't speak to it any further than that. Yeah, but it's interesting.
Oh, thank you. I was just wondering how it comes together.
There's another thing that comes to mind, is spiral dynamics, where you're going from the I mean to the we mean, and across time, the whole, not just a job, but the whole collective of society in various parts are moving across that. And then depending on, you know, you can't have, for example, a whole pile of greenies for, like, you know, I'm just thinking of the green meme. You can't have a whole pile of greenies and nothing else. You've got to have that balance of both.
It could
So
be.
that leadership thing you were talking about earlier, you were saying there's got to be a container. I don't care how laissez-faire your leadership style is, or what your values are, or how you live them. If there's no container, then there's nothing for it to land and therefore to be nurtured and to grow. So it's like constructing that, to me, is where the certainty needs to be broken down and reconstructed to make it more egalitarian.
Yeah, and actually,
Does that make sense?
it does.
Okay.
There's a lot of, I call it like, not new age research, but people who are very sympathetic. My very first publication, or in the second PhD, was around, it's called The Chalice and the Blade, the book that she wrote, and anyway, but the ideas are very similar to what you're talking about, and what I'm talking about there being the we and the I kind of mentality. She saw it as like entirely negative, like all the war in the world was due to like this mentality, and all the good in the world was due to like, you know, the other side. I think that's not a constructive way of seeing things, because it tends to make people feel that they're doing something wrong, and but yeah, certainly it interacts in like a spiral, and what was the second thing you said? Sorry.
I say so much stuff like that extrovert thing, you know, did you keep up with it? Also about I think somewhere in there it's like there's a shift in values. There will be a significant, usually an emotional
Oh, you're talking
event
about
which
the
shifts
container. Sorry.
that whole thing, so that
Yeah.
now we're a little bit more open, we're a little bit more, you know, if COVID came from the hierarchical model,
Right.
the benefit of the secondary gain, as I would call it, into that is that we're all wanting to connect, we're wanting to build community
Yeah.
and come together, and I see that as a shift in the look at this figure eight stuff of the way society moves as a whole, and we're just little microcosms of that bigger container, and then how we're making our own little containers, and it all comes back to values alignment or collective interest, where we're living the same values, albeit differently, but
Yep.
yeah.
So you're talking about leadership. Let's very briefly address that. Like, so collaborative egalitarian doesn't mean lack of leadership, but generally it means a certain leadership style.
Yeah.
It's more facilitatory rather than directive,
Yeah.
and it's different to laissez-faire, which is.
I agree. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, because you're probably about that, but so yeah, and you certainly can define a collaborative group as this is well defined. People know if they're part of it or not, without there being a dictatorial or directive style of leadership. So yeah.
Just to me, sorry.
Oh, after you.
To me, there's a natural shift happening from the hierarchical to the egalitarian side at the moment as the consciousness of society changes.
Mm-hmm.
As we reach higher levels of consciousness, if you like, we are moving from there across to here. We can see that. I could almost put two names up the top of those two lists. I could put ego on that side, and I could put higher self on this side.
Mm.
And what we're doing is moving away from that ego self to more of the egalitarian way of looking at society and the way we interact with it on the whole. And I know there's
Well, I think the COVID actually really helped with that. As you were saying, I think that people won't appreciate the value of relationships, and like the very close, being able to live, not being able to escape to work, and be busy, actually sitting down and being with their loved ones, and also just learning how to appreciate a limited set of opportunities. But whether that's happening or not, whether it's gradually increasing or not, I don't know. I think it needs to happen, but I do think that if you can, I think that if you can be more explicit about some of these ideas and be very definitive, certain people are more inclined to believe it, as opposed to if you speak in more esoteric terms. You sort of only get a certain subset of the audience that way, because a lot of people do trust the science, so to speak. So I think that there's some benefits in having that message in addition to the sort of general language.
So, I'm attempting to make sense of this in order to engage with it. And from what you've said, it's almost like everyone falls somewhere on these spectrums based on their background, their personality, that kind of thing. But society as a whole is probably more on the left.
Mm-hmm.
But a helpful way to think about it might be that we have a hierarchical mind and an egalitarian mind, and sometimes we find ourselves fixed in one, and we think that's the only way to do things because that's what we're used to, that's what our tendencies are. But if we consider what am I trying to achieve here, or what kind of environment am I in, having a sense of what these 10 points are helps us pivot. And it's like, okay, my personality is certainty and direct reciprocity. It's like, well, maybe that's not appropriate for the people I'm engaging with or the community that I find myself in. What can I do differently? Well, you just follow the line. Oh, indirect reciprocity and agency. Let me focus more on that. Let me try to exercise those muscles. And it's easy to see a binary system like this and think the comparison is black and white, angels and demons. But I think what we were saying earlier is that each side has its pros and cons. Each has a legitimate place in the world, and every person has their ideal way of working. The trouble is that by and large we've had too much of one and not enough of the other. And so the question is, how do we step across that line when we're so familiar with one but we're less familiar with the other?
Yeah, thanks Andrew, that was beautiful. I hope that was recorded because that's perfectly said. Yeah, amazing work, yeah, thank you.
To me, I see this, it makes total sense, get it straight away. But in astrology, we've got 3 types of energy. There's fixed, mutable, and just gone blank. It's cardinal. So cardinal starts things and is like the entrepreneur, which would very much be that hierarchy energy that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
The mutable is the flexible one that goes with the flow, and then fixed is just fixed. Just likes to do things one way and one way only. So to me, if you've got, the second part though is also their emotional EQ, because if you've got someone that hasn't done work for themselves, you can do what Andrew says and say, just go to the opposite, they just can't get it. Or if they're narcissistic, their brain just won't get it. So a lot of it has to come with some self-work basically. But knowing that you've got a lot of either mutable, fixed or cardinal really helps, because you know, this is my personality, I find it hard to change. And if you knew that, like in a defence force or workplace, you know how to treat them because they just don't like change. So it's got to be subtle. But for a mutable person, yeah, I want change just for the fun of it. But it very much sort of fits into that. But then how much work have they done on themselves, and are they able to adapt is like the next part of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd definitely like to see each of you people here, apply your own lenses to this work, and if you want to have a private discussion, just as a friend, just having a chat, I'm very open to that. Just going through, because you each got your own incredible universe of experiences that feed into the perspective you have on the world, and if what I'm pushing here or advertising or whatever or have discovered is actually real, then it should be in correspondence.
Well, that's,
with
I guess
what
that's
you're
what I'm
saying.
saying.
Yeah. And
I'm seeing it in different words. I guess we've each seen it in different words, different lenses, as you put it, which is a great way to say it.
Yeah.
Well, if it's like anything, there's truth in that, but we take out what truth is for us, how it's right for
Yeah,
us, true
yeah.
for us.
Yeah, and like the example of the people who are exhibitionists. What's that word again?
Extrovert,
Extrovert. Yeah. So this is not a comprehensive, and this is not like the all and everything's been done right. I mean, this is just it's gathering and get a whole bunch of theory and putting that to bed. And a lot of psychology theory is very simple. Like it is just so dumb almost. It's obvious, but that's the level they're working at. So to actually spin it up into like more complicated and higher levels of like values or etc. That's like further work. So there's a lot of space there. I like to see this as more like your very first level, right? And you guys are working at maybe a higher level where you've actually, because if I was to talk this stuff directly, it's so mundane and like unimaginative. It wouldn't capture people's like enthusiasm so easily. But if you guys can sort of use it as like a baseline, you know, and to then like say, well, actually, when I'm talking about, you know, these 3 different types of personalities, I can feed them back into some of this sort of theory, and then that will might give you a different way of explaining it, but it doesn't at all invalidate or anything. It's actually, I'm hoping this will strengthen what you're saying. So, yeah.
Could it be that another way to apply this in a group like this, let's say, imagine someone who walks through the door and they're very comfortable and very familiar with a hierarchical mindset, you know, self-interest, status, certainty, but this community is very not like that. And so this person starts making waves and rubbing people the wrong way. They don't understand why they're at odds with everyone. By recognizing that their inclination is towards certainty, we could appeal to that person hypothetically and say, let me explain to you how this works. It's like, oh, now I know how it works. When you're dialoguing with people, with this hypothetical person, it's like they don't see the value of collective interest, but it's like, let me tell you why it's in your self-interest, right? Is that another way of kind of leveraging this model as a kind of map for interacting with people?
Yeah, certainly. So a lot of people often think that people act on logic or explicit, you know, just sort of written down things, or you know, what they say. But people act on emotion, right? Inherently, like, emotion drives behaviour, and so if you can give people, it's called double loop thinking. Is one way of putting it, where you can try and elevate someone's vision to where they're actually sitting above their emotions. They're saying, okay, look, I'm feeling this thing, but let's actually look at it with a abstract or a objective viewpoint and so someone who's on that left-hand side, they will, like, you know, if you can say to them, like, what you're doing now is behaving in this way, and that's fine, but there's another way of doing it, and just try and give them some context so they can monitor their own emotional responses. I think that, well, I know for myself, it's the most useful way to sort of then change. I mean, I haven't got the research to show that would work, but generally speaking, double loop thinking of taking an objective view on yourself is seen as being a way to change. That's sort of, it's a general principle. I haven't applied to this yet, but yeah, that would be the idea.
Would you have any advice to someone who's of a very egalitarian temperament, but they're currently existing within a very hierarchical culture or community?
Yeah.
How might they deal with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I mentioned briefly before about I had like a new boss who he wanted me to basically, you know, kiss ass, right? That's the expression. So that's what made me happy, and it was actually really funny because, like, we're in meetings and, like, and they were, like, you know, review meetings, and they thought that I would be, like, causing trouble, and I was like, yeah, actually, yeah, good idea. That's great. Actually, you're right. And I would concede ground quickly and, you know, not cause trouble. And they're like, well, that was a really good meeting. I'm like, you know, to me, it's like, I know what you're doing, I know what you want me to do, and I will do it when I need to. And but then, like, they are there, because most people work on one or the other. Like, this theory is not known, right? So people generally, and people like Pete are pretty rare who can intuitively just switch and go back and forth. It's not a normal thing, but it's very powerful. But yeah, so if you're in a hierarchical space, you act in a way that they would appreciate, they would want you to act, because it's all about, if you are acting in a way that's culturally appropriate, even if it's like not the way you'd want to act or not the way you normally would prefer to act, it just makes them feel a lot more at ease. It feels like you're part of their tribe, and you're not making them clash. You're not clashing with what they expect you to do, because it's all about, it comes down to like expected behaviours. But then what you do is, obviously, is once you actually ingratiate yourself and made yourself appear to be one of the norms, then you start, you start to find people who maybe are sympathetic to that, and have a bit of a joke with them, or you try and like light up their collaborative side a bit. You sort of spark a fire in people selectively, okay? But you do it not in the sight of people who are hierarchical, because I'll go, what the hell are you doing? You're having a joke with someone. No, we don't joke around here. We all pretend to be nice to each other, but don't actually hate each other, kind of thing. So you be very, you just be strategic about it. Does that make sense?
It kind of makes sense that hierarchical, when you describe it that way, it kind of makes sense then that hierarchical cultures rule the world, but egalitarian subcultures or units emerge within those structures.
They do, but they're very difficult to defend, because like you heard about the Moonlight State, the Four Corners report into the police in Queensland. Okay, anyway, so basically what you had is a whole bunch of corrupt cops, okay, in Queensland, who are all basically running, prostitutes, are running drugs, are running whatever, and they were all defending each other. And what happens in that sort of system is that all those people, they will select, or they'll offer a bribe to someone in his junior, and they'll say, if you don't take that bribe, we know you're not part of us. And then they will bully them out, and they will make them mentally unwell, and they will get them out of that organisation. And so they form a direct reciprocal conspiracy, right? Let's say it's not a collaboration as I define it, because it's not about the collective interest, but it's about them individually all policing each other, policing others who aren't going to affect their power base. It's the same thing in an organisation where eventually, because there's the good thing about capitalism. Sorry about this, but it means that companies that are not effective often are very hierarchical, and they don't innovate, and they get shoved aside, and so you have a churn. It's not perfect, but it's at least a pro collaboration effect, and that's a controversial point. I understand that. No, people don't really want to hear that, generally speaking. And I'm not saying capitalism is good or anything. It just has an effect that can be good in certain respects. But that's why government departments, which are monopolies. Okay, when you go to a council and get a license, you don't have a choice to go to another council down the road, right? When you go to a state government to get planning permission, you can't go to Queensland and get it instead, right? So they have a monopoly, right? And monopolies means there's no turnover, there's no external force that's making them actually have to perform, and that means they're allowed to focus on individuals accruing power and forming these conspiracies, and then they will kill any subunit of egalitarianism that exists over time, because it threatens them.
So you're sort of talking a boys' club, more or less.
Yeah, I can
Which
also.
is a collective
Which can be
interest
women.
maintained by direct reciprocal, that word.
Yeah.
But it's a subgroup of the other because of the hierarchical structure. I mean, isn't it brilliant how it all runs?
Yeah. So
We're the humans.
yeah, so there's certainly crossover with it's a collective interest, but collective interest is all about what can this group. You're right. It's a technical wrinkle. But yeah, it is using both sides of the spectrum, but for a very nasty. But like a gang or a drug cartel is a collective also in certain respects, and they're not doing anything very nice. So
So do all comes back to the values again for me and how they're being lived, which is the common factor at the moment. We've got a self-interest called, we've got a little sidekick going here, and as long as we all have the same worldview that we're going to live under the radar, then we're maintaining a very good model, albeit for all of the naughty reasons, but it's still structurally a good model.
Yeah, and if people are making the decision to buy into basically ineffective, so if say your local council is making a lot of bad decisions and taking developers' money, and everyone's sort of like, no one's rocking the boat because it's too much trouble, and they're deliberately playing the game, then that's a kind that happens a lot, right? Yeah. And suddenly when you get the media involved, and then you get like the collective becomes much bigger than what they're willing to actually do, and the dirty laundry comes out, you start getting some heads rolling and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's all feeds into democratic systems and people not appreciating the value of the media. Mainstream media is bad. Well, actually, without the media, then all these little, like self-serving, cancers would be able to just be able to metastasize and grow and grow and grow because everyone's getting a benefit, and they kick out anyone who's going to blow the whistle. Yeah.
Essentially, the model that you're talking about works and can be explained no matter what business structure or business type you are. So imagine we've got in our group we've got about 20 members. Can you give some practical advice that, because essentially people are needing people to turn up and get involved with the skills and gifts that the practitioners have to share. So the more that come along and turn up, the better. Are there practical skills that you've noted where in the dreamers here that they can implement that help build their own client base?
Oh well, I'll probably go back to what Andrew was saying about not only, to me, I'm an analyst, okay? I'm not a leader. I'm not a facilitator. I just analyse the systems, and so. But I actually said the other day to someone that I'm a great lieutenant, right? In terms of I could analyse. So it's not my natural thing to be able to actually lead. So you guys have got skills I don't have, right? And I appreciate that. But yeah, so apart from having conscious awareness of this stuff would be my suggestion, and secondly, modelling, and being actually getting confidence is a big thing. So this gives me a great deal of confidence because it works. So if it gives you guys more surety about dealing with different types of personalities, and knowing that what you're doing is actually legitimate, even though it's might be outside of what you prefer, or sort of accommodating someone who's a bit difficult, as Andrew was saying, just knowing that that's acceptable and that's actually good leadership as well. So yeah, and also giving them space and time to learn to sort of come home, to adapt to that other side of being, different ways you guys have of saying it, but yeah, not being too judgmental, but also not allowing them to destabilize the group, so putting boundaries around them and saying that, if you are going to continue along this behaviour, then this is going to be the consequences. So, certainly policing behaviours if necessary. That's important. And I know Peter's mentioned before about being very strict on who he allows to stay in the group if people aren't doing the right thing. That's critical. Like not allowing someone, if someone's not willing to have a growth mindset, is another way of putting it, and being able to, accept what you guys are putting forward, eventually they've got to go, right? With that one as well. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I was talking to someone today, we could easily have 40 Omni healers in the group, and I've always just been careful to make sure, almost vetoing before they come in so I don't have to exit people.
Yeah.
Just being careful that the people gathering together are open to helping to build and contribute to the larger picture of creating community as well.
Yeah, well, that comes down to, you know, your ability and probably others around you to read people quickly and to make that assessment. And a lot of that's so intuitive and experience based that you almost, you know, like this stuff is not going to help you. You already know it. You know, it's reading people and seeing where they're at. But you're talking about customers and clients.
Yeah.
That's a lower bar. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I learnt that in business is your group is as strong as your weakest link. So that's where what you're saying, it's important not to let just one, thinking, oh, we've got 39 great ones, but one not so great,
It's
but they
better
actually
to have a
pull
smaller
the whole
group.
thing down.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah.
It does seem that if you are working in a more collaborative environment, that you actually get the benefit of more hierarchy too, in that if you're showing others respect more, then you get having more of your own respect. And if you're having more agency and paying it forward more, then it actually gives you more certainty. Like, it seems to me that the more you're sitting in that, and that you can really facilitate that, there's a sort of an interesting offshoot back that, you know, the more you're liking other people, the more status you actually get in the meantime.
Yeah.
But then if you try and flip it, it doesn't feel like you get the same benefits back the other way. So it's interesting how important it seems that being collaborative can actually sort of help you go the other way, whereas if you're all sitting in hierarchy, it's hard to kind of flip the other way.
And there's actually research around that showing that it's much more difficult to shift from hierarchy to a collaboration than to shift to just quickly. So it's much easier to establish a hierarchy and people to accommodate that if they're already collaborative. So and I interpret that in terms of like this is a more evolved way of doing it, and it takes a lot more and some people I think they haven't got maybe the genes for it, to put it mildly, and I think also this is more complicated, more complex. But yeah, I do agree that when things are singing and working really well, there is more stability and certainty, and people are, you know, it's generally working well in a lot of respects. But I'll just very clarify that these are about psychological rewards. That the rewards are being achieved, but this is coming down to what you are seeking instantaneously. But yeah, people who only seek the left hand side, the hierarchical side, they will tend to. It's very unlikely that the other behaviours will eventuate, and that's why, you know, this certain boss I have in mind who's quite hierarchical. He's had people, you know, they either escape or they just obey, but very little good science comes out of that group. They're quite productive, you know, but it's not good science.
Not as innovative.
No, well they don't care about methods, because methods are about, you know, is my product going to be actually robust and, you know, produce, you know, like a legitimate outcome that I can stand behind. They're like, well, you know, the military people won't know any better, so I'll just produce any old rubbish and it's going to make me look good, and, you know, so yeah, I find it quite but now I'm in a position where I can start creating systems which will hold them to account. So
that's an example of you walking into a self-interested environment and saying, well, actually, for the sake of the science, for the sake of the goal that we're here to achieve, we need to shift to a more collective interest value system.
Yes.
Which will then be hierarchically enforced.
Yeah, well, but I think the leader has an important role in directing in their behaviours, being, because followers tend to replicate and emulate the leader. So, but that's not directive necessarily, but it can also be directive, but it's generally less effective because culture's quite strong. And generally also, like you're finding now with the Republican Party, I'm going to speak to your point in a second, Andrew, sorry. But the Republican Party, for example, they're being led around by the nose by their own, you know, people who all love Trump, for example. And I'm sorry about getting political in people who like Trump. I don't want to criticise anyone. But the fact is that, like you're seeing, for example, like McCarthy, he's on his 9th vote, right, to become leader of the lower house. And that's because they're all doing their own thing because they're all off on their own tangent, and they're completely off the reservation because all the people who there's this really strong cohort who just support Trump no matter what, and they know that that's their voter base, so that the leader who wants to like create some sort of discipline, he can't do it because everyone's following basically someone else, and not even someone else. Like Trump himself will like road test ideas, and then what he don't like, he'll then throw away and try something else. So it's basically like the mob leading the leader, and the leader then doing whatever the mob feels is right, and they have all kinds of weird ideas. But anyway, I won't go there. What was the point you made?
That was good.
But that's a model that happens everywhere. That's the point, I think.
Yeah, and America's getting quite scared because they're seeing it potentially destabilise their democracy, which they thought was going to be eternal. Yeah. What was the point you made, Andrew?
I think I'd rather reiterate my question. Could you elaborate a little bit more on these dichotomies?
Yep.
Giving us more of a picture of what they look like in the wild.
Right. In the wild.
In real life.
In real life. Okay. Well, you give me a situation. You give me a scenario, and I'll try and elaborate it.
Well, I think we've already heard a bit about like self-interest versus collective interest.
Uh-huh.
Status versus liking.
Yeah.
You explained a little bit of that earlier.
Mm.
What could you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah. So now, for example, okay, like when I first walked in here, Peter introduced me and said, I'm a community consultant, etc. And that's a status thing, okay? So Peter's awarded me some status, but you guys don't like me because you don't know me, right? So then I've tried to, much as I can, be as friendly as I can and self-deprecating and as human as I can, so that you guys can also like me. So if you have both, that's what you want, right? You want to have both things, but you also don't want to focus on one or the other. If that makes sense. But yeah, so does that clarify it?
So those are two different currencies.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Actually, I was going to say to your point as well, that I theorise that these are originals, and these came from it. So they basically, there was an evolutionary process where we adapted. It's almost like small beaks to big beaks or whatever, right? That they're just different versions of the same thing. That was just a side point about that. So do you want to give me any more?
Direct reciprocity versus indirect.
Yep. Examples of that?
Yeah, just a picture of what each of those might.
Yep.
What's the archetypal example of those?
Okay, so you're looking there at basically measuring someone, and I'm guilty of this myself, like, thinking, what can this person do for me, right? Rather than saying, like my brother-in-law, okay, like today, he, for example, just gave me like a set of, like push-up bar things, right? Like new, because I said, I really like your push-up bar things, and he goes, I've got a set here for you, like I've got in the cupboard, here you go. And I said, I probably have to give you another bottle of wine now. He's like, man, don't worry about it, And so he's completely indirect reciprocity. He does not expect anything one for one. Whereas my instinct was, I felt so guilty about not giving something back. But he doesn't expect that, because he's so firmly on that side of the ledger. And you just got to be comfortable with that. Whereas some people will have to, always repay something one for one.
And with them there's a marketing tool as well, isn't it? What's in it for me? It's like, it's never geared to how do I serve, which would be the other view of the world. It's that whole what's in it for me.
Sorry.
Well, the converse example might also apply. Like I don't know if anyone else has, when you first started getting into these different healing modalities and counselling and whatnot, it was actually difficult for you to advertise for a price. And it's like, I'm charging $60, $100. It's like, that was so hard because maybe you come from a more indirect reciprocity kind of mindset. It's like, oh, well, I just want to help. I just want to give this away. But you, as a business person, you're thrust into this direct reciprocity. And you have to do one-for-one kind of trades.
It's until you understand that you actually gain other people's respect. When you do take money for it, it's not a lack of respect. It's like the exchange of energy. And it's a strange society that we put very little value on something that is given away. Like, you know, well, that didn't really help me, that treatment, because it didn't cost me anything, you know, that sort of thing. So it's like that mutual building up of a respect, that own respect and the other respect and the exchange.
So there's sometimes when indirect works, and there are other times where direct works. You don't want to get those mixed up.
And sometimes though indirect is not a healthy thing, because if you're just someone that gives constantly and don't know how to receive, that's also very unhealthy.
So what you're saying there, though, I think as well, so it's a matter of how far one is on that side or that side.
Like everything.
You know, if you're, you know, you've got to give me something before I give you anything. If you're stuck right out at that end of the spectrum, and you're talking to someone who's the other end, who's the indirect, it's like,
Well, that's
narcissistic intelligence growth, isn't it? Too?
It's really good to live from giving and understand giving is receiving and receiving is giving. It's like you accepted the vase from your brother-in-law and you were giving, in a way, you were giving to him because you accepted it. And if you didn't accept it and felt you had to give something back, then, you know, you weren't open to receiving.
Stops the energy exchange.
Yeah, that's right. That was an exchange of giving and receiving. You gave to him because he happily gave them to you.
Yeah, and actually he also gave my brother some moisturiser because he doesn't take care of his skin. And I said to my brother, like, had a bad dream, just say, look, thank him, man. Like, text him and thank him. And not because it's reciprocity, but it's just like acknowledging, you know, that gift. It's just because, according to the theory, indirect reciprocity works through reputation, right? It bolsters your reputation as someone who's giving, right? As someone who's, you know, you're like a generator within the group. The trouble with society is because we don't live in groups, it's all transactional, it's all like going to Macca's, whatever, like, you know, unless you're in something like this, then there's no reputation is not built up because we don't know what each other are doing unless you're like, you know, because this is why money's important. You know, it is actually a really important way of finding, you know, things flowing between, you know, just different parts of society. You know, it enables that movement because then you use that money to go and purchase something else or, you know, help yourself or whatever. And so it's like money is just potential. It's you can just do things with it. And so someone's giving you, and that money is giving you the potential to do something else for someone else.
That's right.
So it's not evil. It's certainly more efficient than barter. But anyway.
Can I just ask, before you said it was quite rare, what Prem is that he can jump from both? I tend to jump from both, and you said it's quite rare. So how rare is it?
Oh, well, I mean, okay.
Just rough percentage. I don't mean exact, but just you said quite rare. So I'm just wondering how.
Okay, so there's something called anecdotal evidence, which is all I can speak to, which is the lowest form of evidence, right? So as a scientist, I don't like to speak to that level, but I would just say, I don't know, like 10% of people.
Okay, so is quite rare, yeah.
And like my experience, it's.
So most people are really one or the other, most.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I find, and
It's kind of like we've got introverts and extroverts, but there are some people who are kind of in the middle and a little bit of both. But those people are quite rare as well.
Yeah.
And it's being able to also recognise again what to use at the right time. You know, how to move between the two. Like you know,
when to.
like a ninja or something, you
Yeah.
know, like just
An energy dancer, I'm going to call it in my talk.
please. That sounds great. Better than ninja.
So,
Hey, we'll wrap it up. But was there any last words you wanted to say? And it's good that you're talking about money and reciprocity there. We're going to show some reciprocal altruism to Ben. I first put by the door. Don't confuse the door box for
Do you want me to walk
tonight's
around
meeting.
with it?
Might make people feel
No,
uncomfortable.
okay.
So just by the door, that's the box for Ben, and the silver box is the box for tonight. Just, you know the difference there. But did you want to close with anything just to wrap things up? And can I say we've really valued your time today. It's just been wonderful, really great.
Great. Yeah, I just really appreciate the opportunity. I'm just so excited to be here because it's been such a fight to get these ideas heard, and you guys are an incredible audience, and you've all got your own like universes of experience and ideas and that kind of thing that, you know, like the fact that you can draw clients in such numbers, and are building this practice. I mean, you know, it's so impressive, and yeah. So Peter, and I really appreciate you and Andrew for putting me in touch. But the way that you were able to appreciate the idea so quickly, that's even rarer. That's like 1%. Most people are like, you know,
Get a gold
like, whatever.
star.
Yeah, stick with me, guys.
So yeah, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.